Welcome to episode 2 of Photo Geek Weekly, recorded on November 13th, 2017. I'm your host, Don Komarechka, and I'm here to talk about the photographic news of the week with a geeky and technical twist that I hope you enjoy. And today's topics include the launch of the new Panasonic G9 camera, and one feature in particular that we absolutely need to talk about on this podcast, and that's the pixel shift technology that is becoming a little ubiquitous amongst different cameras, especially mirrorless cameras on the market today. Advancements in artificial intelligence for image-making purposes, and the shape of things to come as that technology progresses. And finally, a strange new camera from Olympus that you'll never own, but it might one day save your life. So exciting things to talk about. And we'll start with story number 1. The Panasonic G9 was announced in this past week. And it's a great camera all around. It's an 18 megapixel mirrorless body, keeps up with the frame rate and the sensitivities of the image quality that you expect from a higher end Panasonic camera. They've been making great equipment lately. But one feature on this camera stuck out for me. And it is the ability to have a high resolution mode that pushes it all the way up to from 20 megapixels up to 80 megapixels on the high end by shifting the pixels around, by moving the sensor physically subframe, so about a half a frame in different directions, combining 8 separate photographs to increase the resolution of the resulting image. And for me, this is interesting because the technology has been around for a little while. Panasonic is introducing this as a brand new feature, and I think it's the first camera from them, but Olympus had it back in 2015, and Hasselblad rolled this out a year earlier. This allows, especially for the smaller camera sensor sizes, the micro four thirds, to increase the resolution above what they'd normally be able to fit onto the sensor itself due to limitations in manufacturing and practical limitations like diffraction. So you can get an 80 megapixel camera by shifting the pixels around. This technology actually comes in 2 forms. So this is the resolution increasing version of that. But Sony also recently rolled out their A7R III, which has a different version of this pixel shifting technology. And in the Sony version, the pixel shift that they're doing does not increase the resolution of the photo overall, but it increases the detail and the clarity and the accuracy of that photograph. And so, well, in some cases, if I take a look at this Olympus image, this is from a GH5, beautiful camera, great details and resolution. You are still limited by the total number of pixels that you can get. This is about as much as a micro four thirds sensor can resolve in any given scenario. And this was pushed to extremes. This is at ISO 3200 for those watching the video. But with the Sony A7R III, I am just blown away by the sample photo produced here by DP Review. The original standard 42 megapixel image is not bad. I mean, it's a great image, but as soon as you do this new pixel shifting technology that Sony's introduced here, and then Pentax has had for a number of years, actually. They rolled this out with their K3 II, and it's in their K1 as well. They shift by whole pixels. So this means that the Bayer filter array that has an array of red, green, and blue filters, normally it has to choose one color per photo site on the sensor and then interpolate that data in a process called demosaicing. And that process uses a Bayer pattern, which is a standard across the industry, aside from some Fuji cameras with the X-Trans sensors, and they do a little bit of something different. And so it's an array of blue, green, and red pixels with twice as many green pixels as there are the red and the blue. Now, what happens here is for every pixel that ends up being part of the final image, you have an array of 2 green, 1 blue, and 1 red pixel that are spread out across 4 separate photo sites on the sensor. It has to move then 2 pixels over, make another arrangement of 4 of them, and define that as a new pixel. So there's a lot of missing information when it puts the final image together. But if you are able to shift the sensor itself physically using the in-body image stabilizer by 1 full pixel, and you move it left and right and down and on a diagonal for every image, then you'll end up with what effectively amounts to a red, green, and blue photo site covering the exact same space, which gives you much better color accuracy. There's no demosaicing process that's required. And because you'll end up with 2 green, a blue, and a red over the exact same area, you can cut down the noise very, very well on that too. That's reminiscent, actually, of the foveon sensor technology that Sigma uses in their cameras. But you know, this technology, this foveon sensor, it's only been ever used by Sigma and a few other industrial applications. I'm not sure if it's the patent encumbered process, because we basically have a great technology that nobody's using. And there's got to be a reason for it. But they basically have the blue, the green, and the red sensors stacked on top of each other. And that's commercially available right now in a 25 megapixel body, the SD Quattro H mirrorless camera. And that, by seeing what Sony can do in their camera, they say it's a 45 megapixel camera body, but in all honesty, if you look at the actual resolution numbers, it is 25.5 megapixels. I'm guessing they're saying it's equal to a 45 megapixel camera. But now we've got Sony with their 42 megapixel A7R III that can push that much higher to maybe a 60 or 70 megapixel class of resolution by shifting things around. Now, it's not useful for all subjects. In fact, if you have anything that's moving whatsoever, it's not going to be an effective solution, because you'll have this weird checker pattern where the images don't line up properly. Anything that you would use HDR for, or if you're doing anything in studio where each frame that it's going to take of the 4 shots is consistent, then you will get a much higher quality result. And potentially, as software catches up, you'll have an advantage to move forward and do even better with that. But I've got to ask at this point, Olympus and Pentax and Sony and now Panasonic have this pixel shift technology in one shape or form. Where is Canon and Nikon in this race? And when will we see this type of technology come from them? I think that they are losing this race, and Sony and Panasonic and everybody else that are really innovating in the industry are taking them to task. This could also spell the end of the foveon technology, because we can see very good results that are spreading across the industry that sort of replaces it in a fundamental way, so long as you've got a static subject, which for a lot of people using the Sigma cameras would be using it for the color accuracy of artwork reproduction, or for product photography, or landscape photography that would require a static subject by the very nature of it. So this is new tech from Panasonic to increase the resolution, but there's the variant that Sony's using in the A7R II to keep the same number of pixels in the image that results in a much higher quality result. We're not seeing it in every camera across the board, but this is a deciding factor. If you've got an A7R II, this would be the only feature that I would consider pushing you to down the upgrade path to the newer model. If you don't have an A7 camera, the R3, this is going to be the camera to look at to get the absolute highest quality results. It just blows me out of the water seeing the tests that have been done so far. And this is not even practical use, but the competition is miles behind. And this new technology, I think, is something that we'll have to keep an eye on. And it's only going to get better from here. So very interesting times we live in terms of that technology. And to take it a step farther, the technology that is going behind the scenes in the software side of things, where artificial intelligence is kind of getting a little scary. And there's this story, a paper actually that was written by NVIDIA. And they were comparing a bunch of different celebrity faces with an artificial intelligence algorithm. The title of the paper was called Progressive Growing of GANs for Improved Quality, Stability, and Variation. GANs is it stands for Generative Adversarial Network, which actually has 2 separate neural networks, one that generates things and then the other one that evaluates what that first neural net created in order to improve the results. So they fed it a bunch of celebrity faces, and they basically amounted to faces that don't exist. They're an amalgamation of all of the other various faces that it's put together to create faces of people that do not exist. And it does a pretty good job. I mean, there's some obvious flaws in these images. Ears, it does not quite understand how to do ears yet. Teeth, they need some work. There's only a few examples with teeth, and they're not exactly perfect. But these are portraits of people that are generated computationally. And this is very interesting because, you know, as far as an industry goes, if you can train it to find like all of these different faces, you would be able to, what's the words I'm looking for? Basically create fake models. And the industry is kind of against photoshopping models to begin with. So fake ones, does that completely break the mold, or is that going to be shunned in the same way? I'm not necessarily sure what's going to happen there. But in successive generations, these artificial faces are going to get better and better to the point where they're indistinguishable from the real people. And who knows when they get animated. I'm not sure exactly how far this tech is going to go in that current form, but could you imagine if you had a filter just on your smartphone, like you're taking a selfie, and it has the ability at that point to just apply a beauty filter, a next-gen beauty filter that, you know, defines what's ugly and beautiful about you and accentuates the more beautiful features. That's scary. That technology can exist within the next 5 years if the neural nets today are this close to where that's going. A similar story is using a new app for iOS that if you have a dual camera iPhone, say the iPhone 7 Plus or 8 Plus, and you want to take advantage of replacing the bokeh in the background to get shallow focus effects that are really realistic. This is a fun take on that, even from photographs that you've already taken in the past. The app is called Focos, F-O-C-O-S, and it utilizes all of the computational math plus the 2 images that would have been taken at the time the photo was taken. This is why you can go back in the past to images that you've already taken and get some really interesting shallow focus and bokeh effects as a result. Again, it's not perfect. There's a few flaws. They're very difficult to spot. There's some edges that aren't properly defined that get a little bit fuzzy. But if we're here today, where will we be tomorrow? And some of the effects, especially when you apply creative bokeh to the background, like a different aperture shape, whether it be hearts or a butterfly, these are really well done in terms of swirl and soap bubble bokeh that you'll pay big money to get a lens that creates that for. And so this begs the question, what are we doing to define our art? Is it done entirely in camera? Is it done in post? And any good photographer knows that there's post-processing work to create the desired effect. But when it comes down to the final result, does it matter where these effects come into the equation? Does it matter that the bokeh had to be in the scene in the background? Or is it just the final product that makes the final statement? And so as an artist, I think we'll define that all differently. But this brings me back to a documentary film that I had seen a while ago that studied Johannes Vermeer, the painter from, I think, the 1600s. And this was a really fun documentary film about Vermeer called Tim's Vermeer. And Tim Jennison is a Silicon Valley entrepreneur and inventor. And he wanted to study how Vermeer's paintings ended up becoming so lifelike. And so he basically recreated a Vermeer, understanding the technology. So he took Vermeer's The Music Lesson and reconstructed the exact room and the instrument layout and everything that painting had in it. And using optics and mirrors, painted a replica, having absolutely no skills whatsoever as a visual artist or a painter. And when you see the two side by side, and if you don't know which one is the original Vermeer, it might be difficult to tell. Of course, the one with all of the cracks on it would probably be the older of the two. But Tim, and I've had a conversation with him about this and the technology used, basically spent months of his life to create this painting using a mirror and painting along the edge of the mirror to match colors. He basically turned himself into a human camera. And Vermeer did this back in the 1600s. So if you look at it from that standpoint, Johannes Vermeer, as a celebrated artist, was nothing more than a photocopier. So is he still a celebrated artist today? Yeah, Vermeer is absolutely still celebrated. His paintings are some of the most valuable in the world. So as an artist that's using technology to enhance and even to be a fundamental ingredient in your creative process, is that wrong? Well, it's a difficult line to draw, and we're going to see the technology advance in ways that we can't normally expect. The next steps for artificial intelligence and image enhancement, both from the hardware side, like we were talking about with the pixel shift technology, as well as in the software side of things, interpreting all of that data and manipulating it and changing it. I think that we're in for some very interesting surprises in the next little while. So those are the two big stories I wanted to talk about here. But there is one more, and it's a camera from Olympus that it's an odd one. It's the iTrek EI10, and this camera, it's a wearable camera, so it attaches to glasses specifically, and it has a small little screen as well for a little heads-up display in your viewfinder. This is incredibly reminiscent of Google Glass, which was a commercial failure marketed towards individuals, but this is not marketed towards people. This camera is marketed towards industry. And if you could imagine a camera like this for altered reality that attaches to your glasses, it's designed for people in machine shops that are trying to repair something, or on a manufacturing floor. I could even see first responders using equipment like this to aid in their efforts, and inspectors trying to inspect and certify different industrial equipment. This could have huge implications, even for logistics purposes. Big shipping companies could easily figure out where things are going to go by having the camera pick up on information and prevent people from making mistakes. Now, the reason why Google Glass was a commercial failure, I think, was because it was consumer facing. And there was even a term glass hole that started to circulate before Google discontinued the product. But interestingly enough, Google Glass is back too, with the Google Glass Enterprise Edition that was announced earlier this year. And this is targeted firmly at that industry market that I just defined. And if you could imagine a product like this that is targeted towards industry, maybe you've got a little belt clip that records, I don't know, an air quality report of any contaminants in the air. It could be very useful for miners as well. This is great technology for a market that you will probably never be in unless you're in this industry and you're using them on a regular basis. But the average photographer has absolutely no interest in this technology. But if it's being used by a first responder or by your doctor, then it might be of significant impact to you and might save your life one day. As it currently stands, this tech is mostly irrelevant to us. But what happens if this evolves down a generation or two? And it becomes smaller, faster, better, then it could easily replace the former Google Glass into something that, again, might be just built right into our eyewear, or have other applications for extreme sports, or having it built into a motorcycle helmet. There's a lot of fun ways this technology can be used, and we are on the tip of it here for the industrial purposes anyhow. Where it goes for us, well, I don't think it really matters. Why are we talking about it? Because it was a weird camera that I thought would be interesting, and at a price point that is kind of surprising. At $1,500 US for a consumer, that's more than we'll pay for a novelty. But it is an incredibly valuable tool, almost a no-brainer for people that are doing this industrially. And so it's kind of a fun thing to think about when we, you know, if you are an inspector, or if this saves time, and there were statistics that were put out on the new Google Glass for Enterprise, that it can save up to 25% in certain scenarios, 25% of time. And if that's the case, machine efficiency, I also see numbers from between 8 and 12%. That is money saved. And this hardware, of course, using camera technology that is relatively new and cutting edge, is you know, saving time, lowering costs, and making the world a better place. So that's out there and is worth mentioning. Now, we didn't mention it earlier, but I do want to say thank you to our very first patron on Patreon. Kieran, I appreciate the $1 per episode that you're giving me. That is affording me most of the cup of coffee I had before I started recording. And if you want to support the show, that's a great way to do it. I also had some money put into the tip jar by Carl. Thank you, Carl, for that. It helps with all of the upstart costs. And I hope that you continue to listen, continue to enjoy the content, not just the podcast series, but I'm doing some tutorial videos that you'll be able to find on Photo Geek Weekly as well, that will cover, you know, Photoshop, camera techniques, and everything that I can, you know, put forward into about a 5-minute video. Those will be out once a week in addition to this podcast. Next week, I should say that we'll have a co-host. Every week moving forward, I'm going to try to have a guest co-host on the podcast and switch that up. So next week is Alan Shapiro, and I'm looking forward to having a conversation with him. And who knows what the topics are going to be that we're going to geek out about. We only figure that out a day beforehand, and look forward to seeing what comes from that. So without further ado here, I say get out and shoot, and come back next week for more Photo Geek Weekly. Thank you so much.